Hey, here we are at chapter 3. Will pushed open the door and went inside the back cabin. It was virtually identical to the one that had been his home for much of the last few years. The room he entered took up about half the interior space and served as a combined sitting and dining area. There was a pine table with 4 plain chairs on his left, against a window, and 2 comfortable-looking wooden armchairs and a 2-place settle at the opposite end, grouped around the cheerful fire crackling in the grate. He looked around the room, wondering who had laid the fire, but there was no sign of anyone present. The kitchen was a small room adjoined the dining area. Copper pots and pans, obviously freshly cleaned and polished, hung on the wall beside the small wood-fueled cooking range. There were fresh wild flowers in a small vase under the window. The last of the season, he thought. The homey touch reminded him once more of Holt, and the thought brought a lump of loneliness to Will's throat. The grim-faced ranger had always contrived to have flowers in his cabin whenever possible. Will moved to inspect the 2 small bedrooms, simply furnished and opening off the living area. As he expected, there was nobody in those rooms either. He had exhausted all possibilities in the little cabin, unless the person who had laid the fire and arranged the flowers was hiding in the stables at the back, which he doubted. The cabin had been cleaned recently, he realized. Bartle had been gone a month or more, yet when he ran his fingers along the top of the fireplace mantel, there was not a trace of dust, and the stone flagging in front of the grate had been recently swept as well. There was no sign of ash or debris from a fire. Obviously, we have a friendly spirit living nearby, he said to himself. Then, remembering the animals waiting patiently outside, he moved to the door again. He glanced at the sun's position and estimated there was still over an hour of daylight left. Time to unpack before he made his presence known at the castle. The dog was awake when he looked at her. Her vein-coloured eyes showing keen interest in the world around her. That was a good thing, he realized. It was an indication of a strong will to live that would stand her in good stead in her current weakened condition. He gently lifted her from her nest on the pack horse and carried her inside the house. She lay relatively contentedly on the flagstone close to the fire, soaking up the warmth into her black coat. Returning to the pack horse, Will dug out an old horse blanket and took it back in to arrange a softer bed for the dog. When he laid it out for her, she rose painfully and limped the few steps to lie on it. Settling herself with a grateful sigh, he fetched a bowl of water from the pump that had been built into the kitchen bench. No need to draw water from an outside well here, he realized, and left it beside her. The thick tail thumped softly on the floor once or twice in recognition of his care. Satisfied, Will went back to the horses. He loosened the girth on Tug's saddle. There was no point unsaddling yet, as he still needed to make his official call at the castle. Then he began to unload the small pile of personal belongings that he had brought with him. That done, he unsaddled the pack horse and led it to the stable, where he rubbed it down and put it in one of the 2 stalls. He noticed that the manger in the store was filled with fresh hay, and the water bucket was filled too. He inspected the water. No sign of dust or on the surface. No trace of green in the bucket. He hefted the bucket from the other store and took it outside to Tug, letting his horse drink his fill. Tug shook his mane in gratitude. Will began to organize his belongings in the cabin, setting the bedroll on the bed in the larger of the 2 bedrooms, although larger was a relative term, as they were both very compact, and hanging his spare clothes in the curtained-off closet there as well. There was a sideboard in the living room, and he placed the oilskin roll that contained his books there, planning to arrange them later. Besides the doorway, he found pegs to hold his weapons, and he hung the bow and quiver on 2 of them for the time being. His sax knife and throwing knife, in their distinctive double scabbard, he continued to wear. A ranger only took them off when he went to sleep, or was ready to sleep, and even then they stayed close to hand. Will glanced around. In truth, he'd brought little enough with him, but at least now the cabin had a trace of personality to it, as if it belonged to someone. His thoughts were interrupted by a warning neigh from Tug outside. Simultaneously, the dog by the fire raised her head, turning painfully to look towards the door. Will spoke calmingly to her. Tug's call had not been a danger alert, merely a notification that someone was approaching. A second or so later, Will heard a light footstep on the veranda, and a woman's figure was framed in the open doorway. She hesitated and tapped on the door frame. "Come in," Will said, and she stepped into the room, smiling hesitantly as if unsure of her welcome. As she moved away from the backlight, he could make her out more clearly. She was around 40 years old, obviously one of the women from the village by her dress, a simple woolen garment without the sort of embellishments favoured by the more wealthy inhabitants who would live in the castle, and overlaid by a clean white apron. She was tall and quite well built, with a rounded, motherly sort of figure. The dark hair was close-cropped and beginning to show streaks of grey. Her complexion was excellent, and her smile was warm and devoid of guile. There was something about her that was familiar, though, thought Will, but he couldn't quite place what it was. "Can I help you?" he asked. She made a perfunctory curtsy. "My name is Edwina, sir. I brought you this." Ah, you couldn't see that. Sorry. This was a small covered pot. As she removed the cover, Will was conscious of a delicious aroma filling the room. A stew of meat and vegetables. Involuntarily his mouth watered, yet mindful of Holt's warning, he contrived to keep his face stern and uninterested. "I see," he said noncommittally. Edwina set the pot down on the table and reached into her apron to produce an envelope, which he held out to him. "This stew will heat up nicely later for your supper, sir," she said. "I suppose you'll be needing to see Baron Eggle first, though." "Possibly," Will replied, not sure whether he should discuss his planned movements with this woman. He realized she was holding the envelope out to him, and he took it from her. He was surprised to see that the seal was an oak leaf imprint, accompanied by characters from the coded numbering systems that were the equivalent of 26 Bartles. 26. Bartle's number in the corps, he remembered. Ranger Bartle left it for whoever would be sent to replace him, she told him, gesturing for him to open the letter. "I kept the house and did cooking for him while he was here." Realization dawned on Will as he opened the letter. At the time of writing, Bartle had no idea who would be replacing him, so it was headed simply Ranger. Briefly, he scanned this message. "Edwina Temple is a thoroughly trustworthy and reliable woman who has worked for me over the past 8 years. I can recommend her highly to whoever replaces me. She is discreet, sober, and an excellent cook and housekeeper. Edwina and her husband Clive run the village inn in Seacliff. You would do me and yourself a favour by retaining her services when you take over. Bartle, Ranger 26. Will looked up from the letter and smiled at the woman. The prospect of having the cooking and cleaning done for him was a welcome one, he realized. Then he hesitated. There was the question of payment, and he had no idea how much that might be. "Well, Edwina," he began, "Bartle speaks very highly of you." The woman made a curtsy again. "We got on well, sir, Ranger. Ranger Bartle was a true gentleman. Served him for 8 years, I did." "Yes. Well," the woman, seeing his obvious youth and guessing that this was his first posting, added carefully, "As a payment, sir, there's no need for you to concern yourself. Payment comes from the castle." Will frowned. He wasn't sure that he should allow the castle to pay for his upkeep. He had his own stipend from the Ranger's corps. Edwina sensed the reason for his uncertainty and continued quickly, "It's all right, sir. Ranger Bartle told me that the castle has the responsibility for providing accommodation and provisions to the ranger on duty. My services are covered by that arrangement." It was true, he realized. The castle in a fief did have the ranger's services as one of its expenses, and the costs were deduced from the tax assessments made by the crown each year. He smiled at her, finally reaching a decision. "In that case, I'll be glad to avail myself to your services." "Edwina," he said, "I assume you're the one who kept the house clean and lit the fire earlier." She nodded. "We've been expecting you this past week, sir," he said. "I've come by each day to keep things tidy, and the fire stops things getting damp." at this time of year. Will nodded his appreciation. Well, I'm grateful. My name is Will, by the way. Welcome to Seacliff Ranger, Will, she said, smiling at him. My daughter Dahlia saw you riding through the town. Very stern you look, she said, very much the ranger. Will made the connection at that point. He felt that the woman was somehow familiar. Now he saw those eyes green like her daughter's, and the smile, so wide and welcoming. I think I saw her, he said. Edwina, the question of her continuing employment settled, was looking with interest at his few belongings. Her eyes settled on the mandola leaning against a sideboard. You play the lute, then, do you? She asked. Will shook his head. A lute has 10 strings, he explained. This is a mandola, sort of a large medallion with 8 strings, tuned in pairs. He saw the blank look that overcame most people when he tried to explain the differences between a lute and the mandola and gave up. I play a little, he finished. The dog, still asleep, chose that moment to let out a low sigh. Edwina noticed her for the first time and moved over for a closer look. And you've got a dog, I see, as well. She's hurt, Will told her. I found her on the road. Edwina stooped and laid a gentle hand on the dog's head. The dog's eyes opened and looked at her. The tail stirred slightly. Good dogs. These border shepherds, she said, and Will nodded. Some say they're the most intelligent of dogs, he said. Then, as an afterthought, he added, the fairy master told me she might have belonged to a man named Buttle. Do you know of him? The woman's face darkened instantly at the name. I know of him, he said. Most folks know of him round here, and most would rather not. He's a bad man to have around, is John Buttle. Were this his dog, I'd be in no hurry to hand her back. Will smiled at her. I'm not, he said, but I'm beginning to think I should make this man's acquaintance. Before she could help herself, Edwina replied, You'd be best to stay away from that one, sir. Then she covered her mouth in consternation. It was the lad's youth that had led her to say it, awakening her maternal instincts, but she realized she was talking to a ranger, and they were a breed who needed no advice from housekeepers on the subject of who to stay away from. Will, understanding the reasoning, smiled at her. I'll be careful, he told her, but it seems that at times someone spoke seriously to this person. Now, he said, closing the subject of Buttle, there are other people I should be talking to first. Baron Eggerl, chief among them. He ushered Edwina out, glancing once at the dog to make sure she would be all right in his absence. After taking his bow and quiver from their pegs, he closed the door softly. Edwina watched him as he tightened the saddle girth before remounting Tug. More used to being around rangers than most people, she liked what she saw in this one. Then, as he swung the grey and green cloak around his shoulders and pulled the cowl over his head, she saw him change from a cheerful, outgoing young man into a grim and anonymous figure. She noted the massive longbow held easily in his left hand as he swung into the saddle, saw the feathered ends of his arrows protruding from the quiver. A ranger carries the lives of 24 men with him, the old saying went, and Edwina thought then that John Buttle might need to watch his step around this one. Alright, I'd like to thank you for listening to read up to chapter 3. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 4, then please stay posted and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye bye.